Okay, so let's just start the story with, before I was born, my parents lived on Pine Avenue in St. Louis. And my brother was about 8. And he said to me, when he was about 8 years old, he walked into my mom's room. And my mom was in there, and there was 4 lights. It was nighttime, just right outside the second story windows. And she was like, she was like, go back, get out of here, get out of the room, like that. And so he got out of the room, being an 8-year-old, when your mom says that kind of stuff, and you see lights out the fucking window and stuff, you do get scared. And he said that all he remembers is getting out of the room and kind of like waiting, in another room, because he was afraid to even look at the lights after that. Anyway, so that happened before I was even born. Well, maybe I was born, but I wasn't fucking old enough to know shit. So anyway, later on, my dad decided he was going to build a house. I don't know, some friend of his from his lighting company, I guess, got him interested in building a house down in Piedmont, Missouri, somehow. And so he started building a house down there. Anyway, he got to the top floor. He didn't have the framing yet for the attic area, just the top part. And I was like 9 years old. And I'm going to preface this before I go into the details about in the mid-70s, there was a study done by the University of Cape Girardeau on UFOs because of a huge flap that happened in Piedmont, Missouri. You can look it up on Google. First UFO study conducted by University of Cape Girardeau, Missouri, by professor. I don't know. You should be able to pull it up somehow like that in Piedmont, Missouri. Okay, so anyway, so that was kind of cool too, because we'd go home after a day or 2 or 3 or whatever we spent down there, and we'd see all these news reports of UFOs being spotted down there by people they had telescopes, they were on cars, looking up in the sky and everything. And so anyway, one day we went down there again, and I don't know, it was early in the morning, and I just wanted to fuck off, and find like another salt and pepper snake like I found last time or something cool. So I went over to the pond, and for some reason just felt like looking around there, which is only about 120 feet from my dad's house. And you could hear it hammering very loudly, okay? Anyway, so I lift up a little rock, and a little cottonmouth is in there, and it hisses, and it has that little white shit on it, to identify it. That's a fucking cottonmouth. But it was a baby. It didn't fucking bite me or anything. It wasn't within range, but it did kind of freak me out a little bit. So anyway, it backed up into his hole. I closed the rock back up, and as soon as I stood up, all of a sudden it felt like there was like this beige wall to my left, or tan wall or whatever. And the only thing my mind could figure out was, it could be a mountain lion, could be a deer. You better fucking look and see what that is. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little bit scared because it seemed to cover a lot of area space to my left, my peripheral vision. And so anyway, I looked to my left a little hesitantly because I fucking didn't know what the fuck it was. And it evaporated. It was like a 2-dimensional sheet of color that just evaporated. And when it did, the next thing I know, I'm standing in the middle of the fucking woods. I have no fucking clue. I can't hear my dad's hammering, where I am, or anything. The fucking pond isn't there. I'm on a hill somewhere in the middle of the fucking woods. They have these things out there in the woods called tree fells, I think. And there's where old trees fall, and they just kind of pile up on each other. And in nature's areas like in Missouri, you'll see a lot of them. But in this particular one, it was a clearing of where I was. I was like right in the dead center of a circle. And the tree falls were like in a circle, which was odd, to say the least. I mean, that didn't look like nature did that. So anyway, by the way, as soon as I showed up there, I had a catastrophic panic attack. I almost fell over. I just almost fell over, because I didn't recognize anything in a split second. All of a sudden, I didn't know where the fuck I was. So my heart was going go, 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 go. And I was like, well, fuck, man, just start moving, Don't just stand here. You got to find your fucking, the pond or the house or something familiar. So I literally had to climb over those trees just to get out of that circular clearing, which was in itself just kind of weird. So anyway, I did that, and I must have tried 3, 4, 5 different directions. And each time I did, I'd run into something that didn't look familiar, and I'd go, well, when I say didn't look familiar, it just felt like I was going the wrong way. It's my intuition, you know. And at one point, though, I did spot, I think, our creek, because we had a creek that went around our property. And at that point, I could kind of I could tell that this wasn't the part of the creek that I go to. This is on the far side. So I must kind of like circle my way around. And if I do that on this hill, I might run into the hill that my dad's house is on. So I started doing that, and I think I got lost a couple more times, but I kept keeping my eye on that creek, and that kept me within somewhat, I felt like it was probably the creek. Let's just put it that way. It looked about the same. I just never explored that part of it. And so, but I didn't want to go all the way down to it because I knew my dad's house was up on a hill. It wasn't down near the creek. So I just kind of stayed about 300 yards from the creek and just kind of circled around. And then I started hearing very light, hammering. Barely could hear it. And I started going around a little more. And this time I think it was starting to get louder. So, we're counting down now. It's probably been about 2.5, 3 hours I've been lost. And I'm seriously dehydrated already. I'm already wanting water. I was about to go down to that creek and start drinking out of that. But I was determined to fucking get to the house first, So all of a sudden I get to a rut, a lot of clay and material, and it looked familiar. And I remembered that when I was playing down from the septic tank one time, I remember that all this red clay was in this area. So I was like, okay, I think I might have a clue now. The hammering's getting louder. Now just go up, follow that up. You should run right into the septic tank. So I did that, and it didn't take long. There I was. I was back home. But it took like fucking 3 hours. Anyway, so I walk up to my dad. First thing I did was get some water. I start chugging it, And he goes, what's wrong? What's wrong? I go, Dad, you wouldn't believe this. I fucking was out by the pond. I don't know if I cussed or not, but I cussed even when I was young like that. I said I was just standing by the pond, and I thought I saw like a mountain lion or something. So I went to look at it, and then next thing I know, I'm lost in the woods. I don't even know where the pond is. And he kind of looked at me for a split second, like, and then he kind of laughed it off. You know how dads do? Which kind of pissed me off, to be quite frank, because, I was just lost for 3 hours, and I needed somebody to fucking pat me on the back. Good job, son, you found your way home. But no, he just laughed it off like no big deal. Anyway, he goes, but son, that is interesting in the sense that something happened to me that was weird. And I go, oh yeah, well, what was it? He goes, well, I was hammering, and this big V-shaped shadow went over. And by the way, it was a blue sky that day. There was no clouds in the sky. And he says, the only thing I could think of was a bird. But a bird, it was too big to be a bird. So I was afraid to look back up at it. I go, well, did you look up at it finally? And he goes, yeah, finally I did. But by the time I did, it was gone. I go, well, how fast was it going? He goes, oh, it must have only been going about 10 miles an hour. I go, okay, well, what direction was it going? He pointed right towards the pond. I go, how long ago was it? He goes, oh, probably about the same time you said you were lost, about 3 hours. And man, I'll tell you what, yeah, I might have only been 9 years old or something like that, but I put fucking 2 and 2 together. Some fucking shit, I guess, abducted me. Now, no, I don't remember any of the details. I don't remember being on a fucking UFO or anything like that. But I do remember being displaced and almost falling over in the woods in a catastrophic panic attack and being lost for 3 hours. And I'll just be honest with you. That's not the first time that something weird happened in Piedmont. One time we were driving down the road. It was my sister, my dad, my mom, and it was broad daylight. This road went on straight for a long time. There were no turnoffs. It was a country road, and we're highway, 2-lane. We're driving down. All of a sudden, something goes by us. All of a sudden, the Jeep lifts up on its side and bangs back down. My dad slams on the brakes. All of a sudden, all these little vortex of wind pass in front of us on each side of the road. Little dust devils, but man, they were rotating fast, and there was like 5 on each side of the road, and they're just going. So whatever it was, it came from behind us and passed in front of us. But there was nothing on the fucking road. There was nothing on the fucking road. I looked in behind, I looked in front, immediately. Then I asked my dad, I said, Dad, what just happened? There's no car on the road. There's nothing. He goes, he didn't say anything actually. My mom said, Jim? And he goes, yeah, I know. And both of them, their heads were cocked up a little bit. You know what I mean? Like this. Both of them. And I couldn't get them to even respond. My dad started up the Jeep and he paid no attention to me, my questions or anything like that. And so one day I was at a family gathering at my sister's house, and I decided, you know what, man, it's time we bring this shit out in the open, because I really didn't get any answers from him, and I want to see what he says. So I said, Dad, you remember when we were driving down the road in Piedmont, Missouri on the highway? Something passed us, almost knocked the Jeep over, and wind, all kinds of wind fucking showed up and was blowing in front of the Jeep, downranged, in front of us. And he just fucking locked up. I mean, you could almost see the blood drain out of his face. And same with my mom. And it's almost like they fell into a trance when I brought it up. And so I was looking at him and go, Dad, don't you have anything to say? And, he didn't say anything. He said, finally he started talking. He says, I don't remember. I was so pissed off. And then I asked my sister, I said, do you remember? And my sister fucking acted like she didn't. She was only like 5, so I don't blame her for not, remembering, because she was too young to even acknowledge shit like that. But that shit happened, okay? And there was a study done from a professor from the University of Cape Girardeau in the mid-70s in the Piedmont, Missouri area. They did gather data. They did gather evidence, and it was separate from any Project Blue Book bullshit government fake shit, okay? It was separate. It was a real, fucking university study. First of its kind on UFOs. Look it up on Google.